in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we're going to go to adoption of the minutes. If I can get a motion.
Move adoption of the minutes.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And now we're going to move to open delegations. Our first speaker this evening is Doug Wicker.
Members of council have just turned on the overhead projector, so perhaps Mr. Wicker could start his presentation while the overhead warms up. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship and Councillors. My name is Doug Wicker, and I reside at 410 McNarvin Street. I'm here tonight to challenge.
I don't think the mic's on, sir.
Thanks.
Test. Would you like me to start again? Good evening, Your Worship and Councillors. My name is Douglas Wicker, and I reside at 410 Carnarvon Street. I am here tonight to challenge the assumptions underlying the rush by the city to remove the western half of the Front Street Parkade. The entire parkade represents a valuable asset to the citizens of New Westminster. Once torn down, we lose this asset that would cost millions to recreate. The parkade has been used by the New Westminsterites to park cars, to view fireworks, to display antique vehicles such as the Easter parade on the parkade top deck on the picture there, and many other civic opportunities. As an example, BC Family Day was held down at the quay, and they offered free parking on the Front Street Parkade. That would not be available. At the end of the quay, the BOZA project will remove over 50% of the parking that's available, that exists at the site today. The removal of all the waterside surface parking northeast of Discovery Centre, as shown there, and it's a considerable amount of parking. As shown on the proposed New Westminster or new waterfront vision plan, which is showing there's no surface parking there at all, will dramatically diminish public parking. Now, it will be said that there may be lots of parking incorporated into the three-tower waterfront development, but because of the proximity to the river, this parking is very unlikely to be accommodated underground. It is estimated that the parking podium will extend under all three towers and will be a massive block of at least 3 stories high. That's going to block a lot of your view of the water. That parking will likely be primarily for the residents and visitors of the towers, and it's unlikely that the remaining public parking will be anywhere near the parking that's being lost by the project. If the west end of the parkade is torn down, there will be a dearth of parking at Begbie and Front Street. In January 2012, Engineering Report to Council expressed concerns of the downtown BIA on transportation and parking issues. The comments from the business Front Street are quite telling, and a couple of them. Craig Ruffle of the Antique Alley said, "Please don't tear it down." Harm Woldring of the Wine Factory said, "Well, the contention is that the parkade is underused. As the downtown area continues to develop, the parkade will become increasingly more important." Council and citizens of New Westminster have been totally misled by the Muse concept for the Front Street. The tranquil vision of 1 or 2 cars on the road, people seated at outdoor cafes, pedestrians strolling down the sidewalk, fails to note that the road that remains when the parkade is removed is one of the busiest truck routes in Greater Vancouver. Additionally, there is a major rail line right next to the truck route that isn't even shown or mentioned in the Muse concept, and that clearly misleads the public. There's no mention of it, and they're not showing trucks, they're not showing anything. They're not being realistic to the citizens of New Westminster. Now, the city claims in the report to council dated September 19, 2011, that Front Street would become a more local serving commercial street. However, more recent actions clearly fly in the face of this concept, as in their April 7th, 2014 report, the city attempted to remove all of the east-west truck routes in New Westminster with the exception of Front Street. Had that policy gone through, truck traffic would have dramatically increased on Front Street, hardly a local serving street. I'm a retired acoustical consultant with 38 years of practice in the Lower Mainland, and I can assure you that tearing down the parkade will have negligible effects on the noise levels at grade on Front Street. However, it will dramatically increase the noise exposure to all of the above grade properties between Columbia and Front Street, as the parkade offers substantial noise shielding which will be lost. As an example, the noise exposure to the residents facing on the riverside of the trap project, well, this is the, sorry, I missed this. This is all the trucks and the trains and everything going there. And also notice the lower level of the parkade, literally full. And every time I've gone to take pictures of it, it's been full. All of these river-facing suites are all going to be exposed to most likely an additional 10 decibels of noise. Now, I have a couple of things more. I'm very close to the
Please
end.
continue.
Okay. You can be sure that the purchasers were not told that when they purchased their suites, and you can expect, once the parkade comes down, you can expect a myriad of complaints and most likely lawsuits. Where the North Fraser Perimeter Road proposal was active, the city's policy was to have Front Street encapsulated. If the downtown parkade structure is left as is, the structure would easily lend itself to installing optically transparent noise barrier panels between the columns on either side of the truck route. Similar to what I'm showing here, the panels could go up there. This would block the noise, encapsulate the noise, but still let the vision go through. You'd still be able to see everything going on. This is an example of a transparent noise barrier used elsewhere. These are not figments of my imagination. These exist and they're used all over the world. These could be installed for about 10% of the cost of complete encapsulation once you tear the parkade down. So you're taking a very valuable asset, and if you, in conclusion, if the Front Street Parkade is kept intact, it will provide much needed parking capacity to the Begbie Front Street area. It will provide community facilities for events, walking paths, etc. on the top level of the parkade away from the noise. It will provide noise relief to the residential component of structures being built or proposed for the space between 6th Street and Begbie Street, and it will maintain a valuable resource for the city. I am asking you to delay the demolition of any part of this valuable parkade until these matters are considered further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnstone.
Thank you, Mr. Rickert. I wonder if we could have staff comment on the parking study that underlied the decision to maintain the eastern half of the parkade and to have the western half not maintained.
Through your chair, your worship, to council, in 2012, the city, as a follow-up to the downtown community plan, commissioned a downtown parking strategy, and in that strategy, it identified took an inventory of existing parking on-street and off-street in the downtown neighborhood, projected that out to, I believe, about 30 years, and one of the conclusions of that study was that the downtown parkade would have a significant surplus of parking, approximately 50% surplus. So looking out in the longer term, we do see that there's a surplus of parking, and certainly the western half of the parkade would be redundant in the long term.
Councillor Puckmeyer.
Thank you for your presentation. Couple of things. First of all, I think the residents that are going to be moving into the trap block are going to be ecstatic, especially the ones that have purchased already in front of that parkade. So I don't see that there's going to be a lawsuit over the fact that the parkade's going down. The other, with Family Day, and I chair that committee that puts on that event, we'll continue to provide free parking for people that come to Family Day. It'll be of course, from 6th Street West or East, but there's going to be a new access to the Pier Park. People can take the elevator down, have a beautiful walk to the facilities, and you're 2 blocks from the Amble Center. So I don't think that's going to have a real effect on that. And the last point,
You've got mail.
we talk about encapsulation and the plinth and all the positions that were being put forward by the province when they were talking about putting the North Fraser Perimeter Road in there. One of the concerns that parkade has today, and we have air quality analysis that are being done that show that on some days the air quality under that parkade is so poor that people should not be exposed to it for an entire 8 hours. And I think the fact that half of that parkade's going down, that it's certainly going to address the health issue of those emissions. So I respect your plight to try to reverse this, but I think this has been talked about for many, many years. The resolutions have been made, the issue's passed. I think it's gone to tender, or it's going to tender. So, I certainly isn't something that, in my opinion, that I would wish to revisit. But again, thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you for your presentation. Next, we have Jerry Johnson.
Good evening, Your Worship. I'm Jerry Johnson, a new Westminster resident. I want to add my voice to oppose plans for destroying the parkade. This enormous facility was constructed at great cost to our city, and we should think carefully before we spend millions to destroy it. There are others here like Doug to address the economics and the negative consequences. As an engineer, I want to limit my comments to technical issues. By way of credentials, I'm an MIT structural engineering graduate. I'm licensed in Canada and half a dozen states in the U.S. First, a few basics. Almost all of the strength that engineers count on in structures like our parkade comes from the steel rebar within it. The concrete's mainly there just to encapsulate the rebar and to hold it in place. Beyond that, the concrete does little except to provide a walking surface or driving surface. And I'd like to be sure that we all know how reinforced concrete structures like this can progress to failure. First, there has to be some sort of damage to the concrete surface that causes water to circulate past the rebar. As a continuing source of moisture and oxygen, that water can cause localized corrosion, and let me emphasize the word localized. It's not like gangrene or cancer. If you get a localized area of corrosion, it doesn't spread through the structure. It stays local. In the next phase, a thin layer, a surface layer on the rebar grows a very thick layer of rust. It increases the diameter dramatically and it pops off the concrete around it. That's what we call spalling. When this happens, you'll typically see the exposed rebar long before much corrosion has occurred. Once exposed to the elements, the real corrosion can begin and the rebar can lose significant cross-sectional area over time. The final stage of damage is when the rebar cross-section becomes so small that it overstresses and it fails by stretching. Even then, concrete slabs are designed to fail in a safe mode. The rebar stretches, the slab span visibly sags. People stop using it. Concrete engineers even have a technical name for this. It's called running time. There's plenty of warning prior to any dynamic sort of failure. Okay, those are the basics. Now if I can address the misperceptions that I've seen. When I was at the Parkade open house last week, I understood one of our city planners to say that the Parkade is in such an advanced state of deterioration that there are a number of areas where you can actually even see all the way through the floor to the deck below. Well, since that did not match the Parkade that I knew, I did a complete walk around yesterday just to inspect. I couldn't find even one area where there was deep spalling. So where did that misperception come from? And I'm concerned that there are members on this council here tonight that's operating on similar misinformation. I haven't seen even one location where rebar corrosion is advanced enough to cause spalling, which would begin the failure sequence that I just described. Moving on to the engineering report that I found, there was a lot of discussion about salt-related chloride concentrations on the parkade surface. Even then, the report called it less than expected. I saw nothing to suggest that it was anything worse than you would find on all of our bridges and highways. I found nothing to suggest that surface salt had caused any significant corrosion in the rebar, which again is the major structural component of this facility. Yes, salt is corrosive to bare metal, but our rebar is not bare metal. It's encapsulated in concrete, it's protected from road salts, and it's sealed away from oxygen. You can't have oxidation without oxygen. There was also discussion in the report about a very small amount of delamination. Delamination is where concrete is not fully adhered to the rebar. There isn't very much delamination. If it were all in one continuous place, it would be about the size of a basketball court, and that's a tiny fraction of the area of this parkade. It's acres and acres. It covers acres and acres. For what it's worth, those areas have probably existed since the original construction, and they can be inexpensively repaired, and there's nothing to suggest that they've had any significant effect on the strength of our parkade. But delaminations usually occur during construction, not later. Beyond that, there was extensive maintenance discussion in the reports. Yes, the concrete could use minor repairs and resurfacing. Expansion joints could be blasted and coated or even replaced. Guttering and fences could be upgraded. But compared to the cost of, I'm almost done.
You can continue, yes.
Thank you. But compared to the cost of constructing a mammoth structure like this, these are very superficial and almost cosmetic matters. I saw nothing to suggest that the fundamental parkade structure is any less sound than it was at original construction. Destroying it for reasons like these would be like burning down your house because it's time to paint. Let's follow Europe's example and let our concrete structures live through hundreds or even thousands of years. With little maintenance, they can last almost indefinitely because the steel is encapsulated in the concrete. And on a final note, I think most of us here are concerned with the environment. I certainly am. And believe me, a lot of smoke went into the air to build this structure. And a lot more smoke will go into the air when we tear it down. I want to thank the council for your service, and I hope you will re-examine the things that you think you know about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next we have Roland Gasparani.
Good evening. My name is Roland Gasparini. I'm a downtown resident. Oops. Can you go back? I'm here tonight to urge council to reconsider the demolition of the parkade and to reconsider the demolition of the Begbie Street overpass. By retaining all of the parkade, the top deck can be used as an area for the public to walk and linger while enjoying the views of the river and the historic buildings. This would also preserve parking spaces close to the quayside where they're most needed, and preserve them should they be needed during special events and for the future growth we hope for. Parking here is convenient and easily accessible. Now, this is a picture of the truck traffic, and usually if you're trying to keep people away from air pollution, you don't put more people next to the trucks, first principle. Also, air quality measurements, usually you need to determine who is being exposed by those and what the alternative methods are for reducing that exposure. But putting people down by the trucks is certainly not the best way to do it. Now, for the moment, take your mind away from the noisy truck and train traffic along Front Street, shown here, and let your mind rise up above the traffic noise to the quiet top deck of the parkade. Now take a deep breath and let your mind walk around the top deck and enjoy the expansive views of the river. Feels good, doesn't it? Turn around. Let's check it out. Turn around and look at the views of the city, Columbia Street and Front Streets. Really interesting views. Take note of the overpasses at either end and all the connections to Front and Columbia Streets. All sorts of interesting ways to walk to shops, cafes, and businesses without having to cross into traffic. Feels good, doesn't it? What a great connection to the waterfront. Do you feel healthy already? I do. The parkade does connect the public to the waterfront and to the waterfront in many ways, both physically and visually. Many of these connections are lost with demolition. Now, the New York Highline Park, shown here, is one way to enhance the top of the parkade. That walkway transformed a very old, abandoned, and deteriorated elevated rail bed. New West has a much better structure that needs only routine maintenance for now. We are suggesting very modest enhancements to begin with, such as adding a few sets of benches for sitting and perhaps some information placards, like the ones along the quay. It does not take much imagination to see how this could become a major tourist attraction and a benefit to residents at very little cost. So the parking will be needed if we utilize the top of the deck for the best purpose that it can be put to, which is as a wonderful viewing platform for the public without having to buy a waterfront condo. There are some other views of it. And there's my phone calling me at the most inconvenient time. I think it was one of those advertising calls. So, in addition to being a in addition to losing a pedestrian overpass and a pedestrian ramp to Columbia Street and stairs to Front Street, the public also loses access ramps for vehicles. So more and more vehicles will be entering and exiting right at the entrance to the Pier Park elevator for the physically challenged. So you are putting more and more vehicles right where there soon will be more and more pedestrians, many of whom will be physically challenged. There is no financial reason to tear it down now. The engineering report clearly stated that there was no urgency to demolish the parkade. Maintaining the parkade for 15 years has virtually the same financial impact to the city as tearing it down earlier. Even the cost of maintaining the parkade for a much longer time seems quite reasonable for such a valuable and useful structure. It doesn't seem to me that it is in the public interest to tear the parkade down now. The public has not been well informed of recent plans and other options, and at times has been provided with misleading and inaccurate information. As far as I can tell, there has not been any information provided at the parkade site or the overpass site as one would expect of any other major development. In the past week alone, I've spoken to several dozen people walking on the parkade deck and overpass, residents of New West, that are not aware of the demolition plans and are very disappointed to hear it. Those that do have some awareness do not support demolition. Very few residents are in support of demolition. Many visitors also express support for keeping it. Almost done. The open businesses along the parkade to be demolished want to keep it. I've spoken to each of them. If the public were properly informed, I'm convinced that they would oppose demolition. So it seems to me to be very unwise and financially risky to enter into demolition contracts at this time. I believe that council should act in the public interest and consider holding off the demolition of the parkade and the demolition of the overpass and instead retain these valuable assets. I and my colleagues would be very pleased to discuss this with you in more detail. It's hard to cover all the points in 5 minutes. Thank you for your serious and urgent consideration to this critical issue.
Thank you. Councillor Johnstone.
Thank you, Roland, for that. My compliments on your tailor. That's a beautiful shirt. Yeah, the High Line is a remarkable structure. It is a remarkable piece of urban planning. It is a 2.5 kilometer long urban trail, linear trail, that goes through what was essentially a warehouse district and had no green space at all. And so it was built not by the city specifically. There was a private endowment who raised $165 million to build this linear greenway through that part of Manhattan. I wish we had $163 million to build linear greenways. But anyway.
That's not what I'm asking.
No, I know. I understand that. I understand that. It is remarkable, but I don't think this is a great corollary because this location is immediately adjacent to something that is as useful and that serves as that greenway. We have a linear greenway, hopefully, that will go all the way from our border with Richmond across a new pedestrian bridge and will connect all the way to Braid Station, essentially, along the waterfront most of the way. I think that it's we do have an opportunity to build an urban greenway, and so I don't see a need in this situation to preserve this piece for that purpose alone. But it should be clear, only the west half of the parkade is planned to be demolished. That's the older half and the half that had the larger structural issues, according to the engineering report we received. The east half of the parkade will be remaining for the foreseeable future. The city will be investing millions of dollars on repairing it and bringing it up to standards. So it's a safe and long-living structure. And I think maybe the top floor of that east half of the parkade at some point could see this type of use. I think in the long term, I have my own feeling that parking need is going to be such that we'll be able to do that at some point in the future, but knock on wood. Now, for every person I've heard come to me and say we shouldn't be knocking down the parkade, I have people who are just as disappointed to me that we're not getting rid of it all. I think that the vision that we've shown for the waterfront with the west half of that parkade gone has been really well received by people who are thinking about how to access the waterfront, how to better connect the downtown to the waterfront so people can walk back and forth between it. So I appreciate and I like the idea, actually, of taking the top deck of it and turning it into some sort of urban use, or making it flexible at least so we can use it for urban use at some time. But I can't justify keeping that west half of that parkade going, and more importantly, spending the amount of money we're going to have to do to upgrade that west side of the parkade when we know we don't need that west side of the parkade as far as a building structure, as far as a parking structure goes. If we're going to invest in park infrastructure, I don't want to invest it in building a concrete thing to hold a park up. I want to invest it in improving the parks we have. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank all three speakers of coming out. Certainly this has been an issue that the city has been talking about for a number of years. It's not a decision I think council has taken lightly. It's taken a number of reports and certainly a lot of discussions with the public. I've certainly not been shy from stating my previous opinions on this, which is really supporting moving ahead with the partial deconstruction of the structure. I really think this is a project that aligns with the city's long-term vision for our downtown and connecting our downtown with with our waterfront. I know the removing of half the parkade is not going to eliminate the truck route or the other severance issues between our historic downtown and the waterfront. But I think if we don't start somewhere, we'll actually never get to that long-term vision. And to me, this is that starting point. But I really do appreciate the comments and certainly a very good presentation with a lot of things. And I only speak for myself. All of council certainly is fair to raise any issue into the future. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker, Siad Dedic and Salvir Dedic.